Welcome back to the Cross-Examine Instructor Academy. Our next presenter, Dr. Gary Habermas, is literally a world-renowned expert on the resurrection. And I remember talking to Gary about a few years ago, and he was kind of lamenting. He was saying, you know, Frank, I really just do the resurrection. And I said, Gary, that's a pretty big topic when you think about it. I mean, what did Paul say? This one thing I do, the resurrection. But Gary doesn't just do the resurrection. Gary probably spends even more of his time, despite the fact that he's a world-renowned expert on the resurrection, more of his time dealing with people with doubts. Because people call him all the time because they have doubts. He's written The Thomas Factor. He's written several other books on doubts. In fact, he is an expert in many things. He's also an expert in the Shroud of Turin. If you're interested in the Shroud of Turin, you need to take this man to dinner or to lunch and just listen to him go through the evidence for the Shroud of Turin. It's quite interesting. He teaches right now at Liberty University, but he's also been invited to be an instructor or a professor at Oxford University, so he's well respected all over academia. Gary also has a big heart for people going through suffering because he himself went through suffering. He lost his wife to stomach cancer, and she was only 43 years old. Since then, he has gotten remarried to a wonderful lady by the name of Eileen, and together they're kind of a Brady Bunch. But today, in this session, Gary is going to go into how to overcome the greatest pain you might ever have in your life. Gary has experienced it himself, and now he's going to help us get through any pain that we might go through. So let's give a warm welcome to the great Dr. Gary Habermas.
I am not a specialist in the problem of pain and suffering, the philosophical problem. But very, very frequently, the worst kind of pain we suffer in general, according to many, many studies, actually several hundred studies. I'm talking about empirical studies. I also teaching the PhD program at Liberty. It's my full-time job at theology and apologetics. But I also teach a PhD course, and our counseling program. Okay, I'm not a counselor. I'm not a healthcare professional. You got to hear me say that right off the bat. I'm talking more friend to friend. I used to be a pastor, so this is pastoral advice, friends talking to friends. It's that category. But I teach a course, a PhD course, that's required of our PhD students in our clinical psychology program, and it's philosophy of psychology, or you might call it meta-psychology. What are some of the philosophical and theoretical underpinnings on which psychology are based? And I'm going to be using a number of those. But I'm also mixing it with two things in my own life. One was the death of my wife, Debbie, in 1995. I just told Lee Strobel recently, her death has been written about in at least 11 million pieces of literature. And the vast majority are not mine. So a lot of that is me going through that, having 4 kids at home. My youngest child, the guy who's in the mixed martial arts, was only 9 years old when his mom died. And here's my oldest kids after the funeral, and my oldest child, a son, my second oldest child, who's a nurse now, a gal. They both said after their mom's death, said, Mom was our best friend. I lost my best friend. Well, and I said to them, kids, I lost my best friend too. And you had to kind of stick together. What goes on in your house? But even way before that in my life, I went through about 15 straight years of doubt, and then off and on for another, it probably lasted for 20 years. And I often divide doubt up into categories. That's not what we're doing here. But I talk about factual, emotional, and volitional doubt, and I went through all three. And the last stage being a deadened kind of, I don't care if I follow Christianity or not stage. I went through a lot of doubts. In fact, even after I had my PhD, my mother called me to see how I was doing. And she said, "All right, come with your doubts." And I said, I think I probably will be a Buddhist within the next 3 months. So for me, this message comes as an amalgamation of so many years of doubt, walking away from my wife at her grave, and if I can remember, I'll come back to that and give you a comment about that at the end, and then answering this kind of question. Now, what is the worst kind of suffering?